On the line with us, Angelo Carusone, who is the Executive Vice President at Media Matters for America. MediaMatters.org is the website. In fact, I was plugging it just about a half hour ago. Angelo, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Trump, in the last hour, we were talking a lot about empathy and how Ayn Rand and this whole right-wing ideology, whether it's Milton Friedmanism or von Hayek or von Mises or Hayek, or I mean, you name it. Basically, what it comes down to is I got mine, screw you. And that's been the essence for the last 30 years of Reaganism, and how empathy scores in the United States for 30 years have been steadily dropping. They dropped by more than 40% as a result of this crazy ideology. And I would say another dimension of empathy is the ability to identify with another person who you perceive as being very different from you, whether it's a different gender or a different race. And in the case of race, here we have Donald Trump, it seems to me, legitimizing not just apartheid in the United States, which we had for centuries, but white supremacists. Well, we've had white supremacism in the United States since the very beginning too, and he's mainstreaming it, is he not?
I mean, it definitely is, and it's intentional. I mean, I think that sometimes there's it's easy, or there's this desire to not want it, for the sort of mainstream media and, the pundits to acknowledge that it's actually an intentional decision, but indeed it is. And it starts back before he even launched his campaign. He had a staffer for at least a year who was immersed in these kinds of communities and sending him essentially just raw digests of the messages and the narratives that they were pushing out there. And then we've seen this reflected in the kinds of policies and claims that he's made about Mexican immigrants and Muslims and, some of the law and order conversation around, the idea that black communities are somehow more inherently dangerous or criminal, and then to the more specific kinds of direct collaboration with white nationalist and white supremacist media outlets. He credentialed a explicitly white supremacist program for one of his events back in February, the same time that he was denying press credentials to other papers and publications. That same outlet was given press credentials at the convention, of which his own surrogates and members of Congress were doing interviews with this pro-white media outlet. That's one of their big objectives is to boost the white birth rate. He's appointed a white supremacist as one of his delegates in California, and there's plenty of other examples of actual direct collaboration between him and his campaign and white supremacist groups.
White supremacy has been at the core of Republican electoral campaign strategies in a big way since 1968, when Richard Nixon laid out his Southern strategy. In 1980, of course, we had Ronald Reagan. His first public speech as an official candidate was down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, at the Nebosha, or however you say it, county fair, right down the road from where Schwermer, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered, the three civil rights workers, and Reagan's speech was about states' rights. And then Donald Trump Jr. went there the weekend before last, the exact same, all-white county fair and all this kind of thing. To what extent, I get it that the white supremacist community absolutely believes that Donald Trump is their guy, and that he's shouting out to them in a whole bunch of different coded ways, and in some that aren't even so coded. But to what extent is this message of white supremacy also, in a more subtle way, creeping across and through our society, or at least through the white part of our society, as a direct result of the Trump candidacy?
That's an interesting question. I think that there's a sort of a few ways in which it's sort of creeping out there. One is the reinforcement of and the elevation of and the promulgation of, and that's the most damaging part of it, of the core misinformation and the big lies that kind of underscore this ideology, this idea that white communities and white culture is somehow under attack and is being eroded. And so one of the biggest ways that it sort of gets out there actually is, his social media account, Donald Trump's, is one of his biggest, avenues by which he promotes himself and his campaign, and the single largest community that his account directly interacts with and retweets and promotes the ideology of, and the core misinformation. Forget the ideology. Is this group called White Genocide, or this hashtag, which is a community, White Genocide. And this is not incidental. He does it on purpose. Some of the accounts he's retweeted 5, 6, 7 times. And really what he's doing there is pushing lies, that black communities are inherently more dangerous and are attacking or killing or murdering white people in significantly higher numbers than are actually reflected by reality. These sort of bogus statistics all sort of stem and generate from these places. And what it does in a way is that it starts to it creates a false and alternative narrative, and we've seen how damaging that can be in policy conversations. And what it does is, when you sort of see the ground with that kind of misinformation, it allows for and enables the recruitment that we've seen on the back end. And so in a way, he's kind of in the middle there, which is that he takes the core misinformation that underpins a lot of this, and then at the same time, his events and his gatherings create the opportunity for these groups and these entities to come in under a different brand or their own brand and actually increase their numbers. And that's exactly what's taking place at these events. I mean, some of the biggest outlets have had to increase their own servers because the web traffic has been so tremendous. There's actual recruiting taking place at their events, and their recruiting tactics rely on the same misinformation about the erosion of and destruction of, or the assault on the white community or these communities that Donald Trump initially elevated maybe a few weeks ago or a few months ago. And so in a way, that's been the single clearest direct effect on the overall community.
Angelo, there's
people in, sometimes unknowingly.
Yeah, there's that's fascinating. The starting with Law and Order, Richard Nixon's Law and Order campaign, which Trump has reprised. I think pretty much at least old farts like me who were alive back then, in '68 when Richard Nixon was saying this, I was 17 years old, and I was one of those hippies that he was direct. Basically it was, black people and hippies were his enemies, as Ehrlichman has famously said, and therefore we criminalized heroin or pot and heroin. But you've got, Nixon doing that. You've got Reagan talking about welfare queens, the welfare queen that the New York Times spent 6 months looking for and never could find. And again, it was code for black people on welfare. How is Trump's racism qualitatively different from those two, other than simply being more explicit? We've got about a half a minute here before we hit a hard break, Angelo. I'm sorry.
A lot of it is, I think, in some ways, it's not that qualitatively different. The biggest thing is that he is allowing a lot of other people to do. It's more distributed and fragmented than the racism back then. And so what he's really doing is just emphasizing and reinforcing a lot of the core ideology, and in a way allowing for others to feel less shame about their own actions and feelings that maybe they would have otherwise repressed. He's sort of paving the way. It's like a snowplow.
Right. So he's not just bringing it along. He's actually expanding it.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Angelo Carusone, the Executive Vice President of Media Matters for America. MediaMatters.org is the website. You can tweet him at GoAngelo, GoAngelo. Angelo, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.